Hello and welcome to the Auditing Antics podcast. So today we're going to be having a conversation, Michelle, that I think that there's a lot of differing opinions on.
Yeah.
And I also think that I guess we can keep it in the bucket of differing opinions, but there's some grumblings about it too in relation to credentials, what our industry looks like. And I think it's a part of a larger picture of what we're going to be experiencing when we think about AI. And we're going to talk about that next week more, so we won't dive into that now. But, it's been happening for a while now where there's different forums, there's different chat groups, and there's just the same old thing that we've seen for years where people
Mhm.
think that this industry is work from home, no daycare needed, that type of thing. And we know that that's been a problem for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that COVID really expanded and shined a light on some of that
Mhm.
issue as far as like established coders going to work from home. Obviously during that time there really wasn't many other options, but just because we work from home doesn't necessarily mean that we get to do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and I see things, for example, in different forums where people will say, I put all this money and time into a course. I just got my CPCA, and now I'm looking for a job and I can't find a job, but I also don't have a car and I went to school for this because our family
yes.
structure requires me to stay home.
Yeah.
And I think honestly what's going to happen is that's always been an issue. Like I said, people have always had that misconception of this industry, but I think that we're getting to a point very soon where that's going to be weeded out even more, because our positions and the way you get into the industry as a whole is really going to change.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk more when we talk about AI and the restructuring of coding and what that looks like coming up and what's here and now in some of the companies. But today I want to focus on the credentialing part of it.
Mhm.
And I do want to preface this entire conversation with a couple of things here, because I don't want people to misconstrue anything we talk about with a negative tone. And the
Correct.
reason that I say that is there's there's different perspectives, different opinions, and different ways that credentials are obtained and used within the industry.
Mhm.
So keep that in mind. Everybody can be different. And Michelle and I have some examples we're going to go through today too that we've
Even
experienced or know people that experienced. Go ahead.
you and I have a distinct difference. We even our
Right.
sister-in-law, amongst the 3 of us, we have different career goals. We have different credentials and things like that across even the 3 of us, yet we all do very similar things.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
you don't have to mirror what the person next to you is doing.
Right. Right. So the overall message that I hope you get from this as we go through this conversation is that you still have to pursue and look at what's right for you, but don't go into this blindly, because
Mm-mm.
right now, as a part of these forum discussions and things that I've been trying to get myself away from because it's hectic. That's where there's a lot of frustration in the industry, because people think, oh, I got my credential, I'm good to go, or I have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 credentials, so I can be an auditor, I can manage a team, I can have a high salary. And those aren't necessarily the truths, and there's a lot of variables that come into that. But it's really, I think, getting out of control a little bit in the industry, because there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of people who don't feel like they have a safety net, especially if you're newer in the industry. There can be concern, okay, what way do I pivot? Where do I go with this? And I'm hoping that having an open conversation about this in a respectful, professional way is going to help people to understand that you can navigate this, you can do this with, you know, critical thinking of your own, apply it to your life and the goals that you have for yourself.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Now, I want to start out by saying one of the reasons that I wanted to have this conversation is because when I think about the future of where we're headed, one thing that has bothered me, to be honest, is that we have situations where there's all different types of organizations out there that you can go to for training. There's organizations you can go to for certifications. AAPC is one of the main ones we have. AHIMA is another main one that we have. And it's to the point where some of these entities just have so many credentials. I begin to question, okay, what is the point of having alphabet soup after my name when the skills that I have and the experience that I have should speak for itself?
Mhm.
And, we recently had the CPCM come out, for example. And I find this interesting because I actually just had somebody ask me about this morning and said, "Hey, are you thinking about taking that?" And my stance is no, I'm not thinking about taking that, but my reasoning could be different than another. And
Mhm.
we have to remember too, one thing that I want to talk about here, but I want to keep respectful, is the fact that to some extent, when we look at a base credential like the CPC, I feel like those of us that are US based, that have put a lot of our time, effort, family, money, all of those things have gone towards a career in this field, we have essentially been sold out to offshore work. And we do
Yes.
need to acknowledge that as a part of this conversation, because when credentials were opened up, and not every company, you can research this on your own, not every company allows somebody offshore to just go ahead and take it because they feel like it. But we have entire massive organizations overseas that are pumping out staff training, building their own businesses. Some of these entities have their own presence in these countries as well. And they've essentially said that the competition of what's taking work out of the US is equivalent to what you're receiving here in the US. And to be frank, we've seen for a long time that it's not equivalent for many
Mhm.
different reasons.
Yeah.
There are times where people that don't understand our healthcare system don't understand how to grasp what's happening, especially when we get into highly specialized areas. This isn't one size fits all, and they're trying to put it into that bucket. So, when we are US based, when our industry in the US is facing whatever type of situation is here now and coming next, where we're losing our jobs, meaning US based coders are losing their jobs to AI with Indian based support services, things like that. All of this is leading into the conversation that I want to have today because
Mhm.
it is frustrating. I do feel like the quality is going to suffer, but there's, CEOs and CFOs that are making decisions out there based on, okay, we could risk this percentage of having things incorrect and we'll just pay if we're caught or things like that.
Yep.
And it truly is impacting the decisions of people looking to come into the industry and people that are here and now that, have an unknown future.
Yeah. I agree 100%, and there's just so much that um is changing, it seems, with the industry, that it's more important than ever that we know how to guide our own careers and that we're paying attention to our
Mhm.
career paths. Because I feel like, we've all met those people who have been coding for what seems to be an eternity. And,
Yeah.
some people, that's what they love to do. And I'm a big proponent of, don't just do something because that's what you think is
Mhm.
what's best and what's next. Like, if you look at you and I, we talked about the differences. Like, you went on to do consulting. I'm happier auditing. I don't I don't
Mhm.
want to do the consulting. I want to do the auditing, and I want to do the finding, and and be on the back scenes. So, it's changing where if coding is what you do and you love and you don't want to do anything different, you've got to pay attention to what's happening
Mhm.
to the current industry and the changes that are being put in place because they're trying their hardest to make coders obsolete. I don't care what anybody
Mhm.
says when they're talking about AI and all these things. They're trying to tell us that they're going to make coders obsolete. You and I both know nobody has successfully done that yet. But we've got to be paying attention to that. And part of that then, you when you look at career development, you're like, man, I guess I need to start looking at another credential. And so that's really the conversation we want to talk about is that career development and making sure that we're doing things that make sense for us.
Mhm. And, one thing I want to say too, so I had mentioned the CPCM, for example. That's out there right now. I think it's out there as a beta. So you don't even have to pay for that currently, I think. So those types of things are very, enticing to people. They'll want to look at that. My question to myself is, okay, the CPC that M is there. They do have some prerequisites, which is good, that show
Hmm.
that, I don't know how they validate those and make sure that people really have the experience before, but they show what type of person the CPCM is applicable to. But my concern with that is, okay, this is showing mastery in coding, but are you also offering that to overseas where they're already taking all of our jobs and they don't understand this in and out like we do? So that is a good example. Maybe that is interesting to you. Maybe because there's no cost to it right now, you want to do that. I'm not putting down anyone who has a certain credential or who wants to do certain testing and things like that. I just want to give my viewpoint. And you can tell too, when you look at my signature, when you look at my website, I have 3 credentials. And there's a reason for that. They're from 3 different entities, which I think is great when people seek out credentials. I have CPC, I have my RHIT with AHEMA, and I have my CEMA with NAMUS, which, Michelle, you have the CEMA as well.
And I have my CPC through
Yes.
AAPC. So
Yep.
similar,
Yeah.
two different entities for me. And it's there's just value, I think, in looking to see what's out there.
Mhm.
Now, one thing that I want to kind of take a step back to kind of talk about a little bit. I know we're talking about career development, but you touched a little bit on, these people in the forums, they have their CPCA, they're like, why can't I find a job? Um, Getting your CPCA or your CPC, taking that exam doesn't automatically tell somebody you're ready to come work for them.
Mhm.
um in all honesty, you've taken a test. One thing that for me was a complete shock is I got to my first coding job and I was like, I know nothing.
Well, because and let's explain, Michelle, because
Yes.
you had a different path
So
than I did.
I
You went
did.
from banking into coding. So you
Yes.
had not seen the revenue cycle. You
None
had
of it.
seen nothing. You just had
I
a
hadn't.
patient's understanding of the medical system.
So you might say, Michelle, you had a CPCA and you got a job. How did you do that? And I didn't get my job because of Stephanie. I didn't get my first
Mhm.
job because of Stephanie. I don't want to think there's any nepotism going on here, folks. Um, I may have decided to switch careers because of Stephanie, but I networked. Okay.
Mhm.
I am, I recognized that working from home wasn't an option. Stephanie was working from home at that point,
Mhm.
but there is value to going and working on site. So if you're somebody who's sitting like I was in a career in banking and it was just crumbling around me, it was becoming a sales job. I am not a salesperson. I am a relationship builder. Like that is how I did banking. And realizing quickly they didn't care about the relationships that I had built, and I needed to move on because it no longer was for me. I networked. When I went and took my first exam, you're at an AAPC chapter, or back then, back in the day, you had to climb a hill, uphill both ways to take your exam, folks. No, you had to go in person to a local chapter that was hosting an exam. So
Mhm.
I connected with those people that I was taking an exam at. I was telling them what my goals were, and they said, let us know when you passed, because obviously you leave the exam and you don't know what the result is.
Right,
So
right.
basically, they say, if you're successful, let us know. Um, I was not successful on the first try, just so you know. But when I was successful and passed, the first thing I did is I went into the AAPC website. I found the name of the person that I talked to, and I messaged them and I said, just want to let you, follow up with you. We had talked back when I took the exam, and I wanted to let you know that I passed and have my CPC. So that's how I found my first job, as a CPCA with no experience. I
Mhm.
also found a way to highlight my experience from banking, qualities that I took the time to see what overlapped, and I showed how those could be valuable to them.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as getting a CPCA and then going and filling out a bunch of applications. You really have to find those people. You have to network. I say chapter meetings are an amazing place. If you are new, go to those meetings. I know a lot of them are virtual, but find opportunities to get face to face with those people.
Mhm.
Put yourself out there. Look up who, a lot of times these officers hold positions with your local hospitals. They
Yeah.
work local because they have these chapters for the hospital workers, to meet
Yes.
those requirements. So just a little side note there. It's you have to put yourself out there. You have to introduce yourself, and you have to find who the right people are that you need to be talking to, because going on Indeed and filling out hundreds of applications, there's you don't know how many other people are doing the same things.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's a really good point because when I was at May Mania for the Knoxville chapter last month, that was really great because we talked about I hadn't been to a local chapter meeting in a long time. And not only is it helpful for somebody new, but also think about if you're in the position trying to decide what's next. I actually had a couple of conversations with different people that are in different levels of their career that are talking about what's next for them, or one person manages a coding team, so what's next for their team. So
mhm,
it really is a great place to network and find people. I know just in that one room, there were multiple different local hospital and organizations represented. So even if it's virtual, get connected. With the Knoxville chapter, I haven't followed it as closely, but I know that they also try to do, I think that they have to, as a chapter, do 2 in-person meetings a year, but then they also like to get together, I think at least twice, to do volunteer work together as a group. So there's
mhm,
ways to get involved and meet some people and have that input to find out, okay, this is what's going on. For example, I have the viewpoint, like I said, related to some of the more specialty specific credentials, but AMA, or not AMA, I'm way too far in my guidelines today. I've been auditing a lot this week. AAPC also has different varying levels of credentials. The
yes,
CPMA is an amazing credential that you can go after if that's part of your career
mhm,
goal. So, like I said, it's not that organizations as a whole are pumping out things that, I don't see value in, but
mm-mm,
there are strategic ways to look at what you're going to do and what you're going to obtain. For me,
yes,
I work in a lot of specialties. I don't think it would be beneficial to me to go and take every specialty credential and just have it after my name. There's certain
yeah,
things that you can put there. So, Michelle, let's head in that direction as
yeah,
well. And let's have a conversation. So I remember clearly we've talked before about, some of the prior toxic work
I
environments.
think I
And
know where you're going with this.
yes. And it's interesting because you're not the only person I've had this conversation with. I've had other people say, typically if they work inside a hospital system or a large multi-specialty organization, there can be times where you've got to deal with the internal politics and what comes along with that. And sometimes people may be threatened because you want to learn or because you want to pursue something. And I really want people listening to stop and think about that, because you're making the decision for yourself. You're not making the
Mhm.
decision for your manager. You're not making the decision even maybe for that organization. Maybe that's not going to be your long-term goal. So this is a very personal decision that you need to think through and make. And Michelle, you came across that when you were working through your experience. You were gaining more experience and you were ready to go to another level. And I'll
Mhm.
let you take it from there about your interactions at work.
So I had been doing basically revenue cycle management. So beginning to end, but heavy on the coding, heavy on the education. Um, the the main part of my role was E&M coding. There was the education stuff, but it was E&M coding. So I'm like, I really think that I would like to dive deeper in into this E&M stuff. It's my main goal. So I decided, you know what? I want to get a CEMA. I was looking through what NamUs had to offer. I turned to NamUs for a lot of guidance and education. Great resource. Um, so I was like, I really want to get the CEMA. Around this same time, it also happened to be performance review time. So I'm like, oh, great. Okay, I'm going to go up and I'm going to talk to them about my performance review. Luckily, everything was good. And then they get to the section was like, what goals would you like to set for yourself for the next 12 months? And I'm like, yes, I have a goal. Thank you, Jesus. I have a goal. And I said, I would like to obtain my CEMA certification and explain that it's an E&M auditing certification. Really relevant in my mind. And my manager, dead face, looks at me and says, why do you think that's beneficial to us?
Yeah,
Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it be? That
I
that
know.
was a pivotal moment for me where I had to really look at where I wanted to go and very quickly realized it was not going to be there.
Mhm.
I still went out and pursued my CEMA, got my CEMA because I knew I wanted to pursue auditing, E&M auditing, and auditing in general. And so had I been looking to make a long-term career with that hospital, it was clear they did not value obtaining a CEMA.
Yeah. And there's something to say for the education piece too.
Yes,
And
having that
that's
understanding, that
yes.
in-depth understanding allows you to better educate your providers on these
Yeah.
services. At the time, that was our focus. We had other people who focused on surgical. That was fine with me. But that was kind of like a holy cow. So when you're making these decisions about credentials, you need to really think, where do I want my career to go? And what do I want to do as a result of getting this credential? It's good to have a conversation with your employer about what your goals are and what you want to do and kind of feel that out. Because if you go and put all this time into like a CPMA, and then you just magically expect to get something more for it. You think you're going to go and they're going to pay you more or give you more responsibilities. That may not be true.
Mhm.
So that I think that's the point we're trying to get across is there is value in these credentials and seeking other credentials, but you have to make sure it makes sense. Seek and pursue what makes sense for you. Don't just blindly go out there thinking because you have all these letters after your name, you're going to get something more for it.
Well, and the other thing too, so let's think about it from an employer mindset and let's think about it from a personal mindset. So, some employers I have actually seen, which is great, different listings or different positions where if you have a certain credential, you can be paid more. Or sometimes, if they're looking for an auditor or for a certain
Mhm.
specialty, they will accept experience, but then they want you to have that certain credential within six
Yeah.
months, a year, similar to what we experience with the CPCA.
Mhm.
So that's really good to be aware. If you have goals for yourself, that's some of the research you can do. Go out there
Yes.
and start looking on LinkedIn, start looking on Indeed. What do these types of positions that stand out to you that is something you hope for in the future? What does that look like so you can understand? Now, the other viewpoint is from education. And there are people that, and I've got a lot of friends that are still in the coding industry. There's a lot of people out there that pursue credentials because they want it from the educational viewpoint. That
Mhm.
is great. If that's a way that you want to have access to information, sometimes people do feel stunted by their employer because to your point, Michelle, it could be a toxic environment where everyone feels threatened by each other, or it can be a situation where maybe there's just not openings for you to learn a specialty that you want or things like that. So in that situation, it's not a bad thing, but that's also where you need to be realistic that just because you studied and you obtained that credential doesn't mean that if a position opens or if you go to a new employer, you would automatically get that because you essentially still don't have experience in that outside of education. Now,
Mhm.
being upfront with that is also very important because I always wonder sometimes, and actually I've experienced this in situations where I've either had the responsibility of hiring people or of training people that were hired that I wasn't involved in. And I will tell you, there's many times that people that had a lot of credentials couldn't actually apply things and
Mhm.
things that we would think of as basic skills when it comes to auditing or education. So that it makes a difference. You have to learn the skills, you have to do the work. And, one thing that I find interesting about your situation too, Michelle, I had a conversation this week with an organization just asking some questions about how their department is set up and things like that. And, we were talking about what if a team member takes 8 hours to research something. That's incredibly problematic. And my question would be if it takes them 8 hours to research one scenario, are they even qualified for that position? And then that gets me thinking, okay, you could have someone who would like to be an auditor and they obtain a CPMA, but what if they don't have experience to back that up and then they get this auditing role? There is expectations at certain
Mhm.
levels of the industry. So not that it's bad, but you would need to go into that situation very transparent,
Yeah, or even
letting them know like, hey, I've got my CPMA, but I actually haven't had the opportunity to work as a production auditor yet.
yeah.
That's great. That shows that you are motivated. It shows that you value education, you value continual learning, which I think is extremely important in life in general. But the point here is that again, you've got to be strategic.
And think outside the box. Look at the broader picture. You brought up research skills.
Yeah.
If you want to become an auditor, please become proficient in Excel.
Mhm.
Learn how to use a spreadsheet. Become proficient in articulation. Uh, Practice how you're going to articulate your findings.
Mhm.
Um, those are things outside of having a credential that if you don't know how to do, you're going to struggle. Research is a huge one.
Right. There's a big
Practice.
difference. You can tell, and I can tell, I should say, over the years and working with people that are heavy on the education side and light on the experience side.
Hmm.
It just there's a big difference there. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. That may be what that person enjoys, what they want to pursue, but you
Yeah.
just have to do that understanding what that means to people in the industry and what it could mean for the future when, next week we talk about AI and realistically where our industry is headed.
Yeah, and I think that you just have to be open and honest about where you want your career to go. Doesn't mean that you can't change your mind down the road,
Right.
but talk to your current employer about it, because the other side to this, we've talked about a lot of toxic scenarios, but your employer may want to support you in
Mhm.
those endeavors. They may want to say, you know what, this is great. We really could, you like, why you would ever discourage any type of learning is beyond me. Like, there's a better way that my situation could have been handled than why would this benefit us.
Right. Right. Well, and sometimes
And
too, to your point, some even like hospital systems, they'll have a budget and they'll say,
yeah,
okay, depending on the position you're in, you have this much to put towards education. What way do you want to use it? So maybe they will pay for you to go through AAPC course and then pay for the exam or whatever the package is built like for that. So yeah, that's a great point. You want to take advantage
yeah.
of all of the opportunities that come your way.
And I will say, I I took that interaction to heart. I got my CEMA, and shortly after there I was out of there.
Hmm.
I never looked back
Yeah.
except to tell you these stories.
Exactly. Well, I hope our conversation today has helped. I know, like I said, this is something that I feel like people are skirting around in the industry and people don't want to call it out for what it is. And, look at there's always going to be good parts and bad parts to each of different organizations out there. For me, it's just frustrating that as we see our industry depleting in the way that we're used to it looking like, we still have the same sales tactics happening and things like that. And, I just don't want to see people taken advantage of. There's all kinds of programs out there, like I said, not just the credentialing bodies themselves. And, it makes me wonder when I see people still selling the same CPC training courses. It's like, okay, guys, we really got to think about pivoting because what we anticipate coming is already here. We just don't
Mhm.
see it on a large scale yet. So hopefully this week's conversation helps along with what we'll talk about next week. And again, just being open and frank about where we're at. Hopefully, this opens up some discussions. Feel free to leave comments, all of that. We're recording this today. I'm actually going to be headed to Cleveland tomorrow for the NSCHBC conference. I'm heading in a little early. I really wanted to go see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So I was telling Michelle about that. The last year, the inductees, one of them was Soundgarden, and Chris Cornell is my favorite vocalist of all time. So I've got to go see some Chris Cornell things. So I'm hoping to get into town early enough, go over and take a look at what they have there in the museum.
That'll be cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm sure I'll post about it on LinkedIn. But all right. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you all next week.